It is October 29th, 2024, and both the Pentagon and the new NATO chief are suddenly hopping on board with Zelensky's claim that there are thousands of North Korean troops in Russia right now fighting alongside Russian forces. Now, all of this comes as we have the Group of Seven alliance setting an incredibly dangerous precedent here by finalizing a $50 billion loan for Ukraine that is backed by the interest from the $300 billion in frozen Russian assets that the West has seized over the last 2.5 years. We are going to get into all of the latest there and, of course, what all of this actually means. But before we do, just a quick note. I know that I typically include a call to action at the end of my videos. Today, I'm also going to include one at the beginning. If you find value in my work, right? If anything in these videos resonates with you, please take a moment to consider signing up as a paid subscriber. Thank you so much to all of you who have already, who have taken the time to support my work. I am a one-woman band here, right? I'm doing all of this myself when it comes to the writing, the research, the filming, the editing, the promotion, every single part of these videos. And I know that you typically sit down, right? You watch a 15 to 20 minute video, let's say, that I post on YouTube. There is hours of work that goes in before that, right? I've got hours of time researching the topic, taking notes on it, trying to figure out what in the world I want to say and how I want to put it all together. Then I actually film it, and then it takes me hours to edit it all together, add in the graphics, and then I have to go about posting it on 17 million different social media platforms because that is just the world that we live in. I am grateful that we have options, but it is a lot of work at the end of the day, a lot of work that I am grateful to have the privilege to do. But I do want to remind you all that if you do sign up as a paid subscriber over on my page on Substack, that's rachelblevins.substack.com. Or if you sign up as a paid subscriber over on my page on Patreon, that's patreon.com/RachelBlevins. That's where you'll get access to exclusive content that you won't find anywhere else in the form of my weekly series, which is exclusive for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. This week, we are going to be diving into the question of whether, if Trump is elected for a second term, he will actually end U.S. support for the war in Ukraine. I know that this has been a hotly contested topic, and so my plan for this week is to dive into all of the ins and outs. What do we know based on what Trump has said, what his running mate J.D. Vance has said, and kind of who are the forces around them, for better or for worse, when it comes to the influence that there could be on a second Trump administration to either allow him to end U.S. military aid and support for Kiev in the war in Ukraine, or to make sure that he continues on with that support for as long as possible. My video on that topic will be available for paid subscribers this Wednesday, so do be sure to check that out if you're interested. And now back to the topic of this video, because while it is also Ukraine related, I wanted to specifically look at how this whole North Korean troops in Russia story came about, because we've been hearing about it here and there for the last couple of weeks, right? It's really kind of ramped up to the point where now the Pentagon is commenting on it, and of course the new NATO chief is commenting on it. And I think it's always important to remember here that timing is truly everything at the end of the day, right? You look at what is being promoted in the mainstream media, and then you have to take a step back and ask, okay, what else is going on around here, right? Why would they want this story to be front and center? Well, one of the reasons why is that we've had Zelensky over the last month trying to promote his so-called victory plan. And we just have to acknowledge that this man was set up to fail here by the US in particular, because he had that highly anticipated, really amped up trip to the US. And there was all of this talk about Zelensky's going to bring his victory plan of how he's going to beat Russia. Well, I've said then, and I'm still saying now, although I have not seen the exact text of that plan, I don't think that there is any magical victory plan, right? Any magic answer, any magic number of aid that the US just has to send this many weapons or to do this and that in order for Ukraine to magically win. And then the question also is, what does winning look like? Which I guess is another topic for another day. But the plan that Zelensky did come up with, or maybe arguably the plan that the West came up with for him and then kind of peddled as his own, was one in which Zelensky is literally demanding for NATO to go straight into direct war with Russia, right? He's calling for restrictions to be lifted on Kiev's use of long-range weapons inside Russian territory, which Moscow has already said is a non-starter for them because they know just how involved the US and other Western countries are or would be in those attacks. But beyond that, you also have Kiev demanding to join NATO in a time when it's currently at war with Russia, which would mean that if Kiev joined NATO tomorrow, then all of NATO would be at war with Russia tomorrow, even more than they arguably already are. So you have Zelensky with this so-called victory plan, right, that he's trying to peddle. You have pretty much everyone in the West being like, no, it's not going to happen. They were enthusiastic about it at first. And then the vibe coming from the EU was almost kind of like, why are you doing this now, right? Why are you drawing more and more attention to the fact that there really is no actual victory here? There's the possibility of the West joining and going to full World War III with Russia, but even then, that doesn't really guarantee them a victory. So it's like Zelensky stretches the headlines as far as he possibly can when it comes to his so-called victory plan. And then when that runs out of real estate, all of a sudden we start getting headlines about North Korea. In his video address posted on October 13th, Zelensky said, quote, "We see an increasing alliance between Russia and regimes like North Korea. This is no longer just about transferring weapons. It is actually about transferring people from North Korea to the occupying military forces." He claimed that around 10,000 North Korean soldiers could join the war. And right on cue, South Korea was there to back him up with a statement of their own, which said that according to South Korea's spy agency on October 18th, 1,500 troops had already arrived in Russia, but the anonymous sources quoted in South Korean media claim that the final figure could be closer to 12,000 troops. And it seems like everyone needs to work a little bit harder to get their numbers and their timelines straight here, because Ukraine's spy chief, Krylo Budanov, was interviewed by the War Zone. And in an article that was published on October 17th, he said that there were nearly 11,000 North Korean infantry troops already training in eastern Russia to fight in Ukraine. He claimed those troops will be ready to fight in Ukraine on the 1st of November, and that the first group of 2,600 soldiers would be sent to Russia's Kursk region to fight against Kiev's incursion. So there are plenty of claims about what Russia and North Korea are doing, but what do Russia and North Korea have to say about what they're actually doing? Well, the Kremlin was quick to deny the claims. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov noted that while the two countries did sign a new comprehensive partnership treaty when President Putin visited North Korea back in June, and it does allow for mutual military assistance, that reflects an exclusively defensive position. North Korea also dismissed the claims, with a representative from Pyongyang speaking at the UN General Assembly on October 21st. That's when he said, quote, "As for the so-called military cooperation with Russia, my delegation does not feel any need to comment on groundless and stereotype rumors aimed at smearing the image of the DPRK and undermining the legitimate, friendly, and cooperative relations between sovereign states." So we have South Korea and Ukraine making one claim, not presenting any evidence of that claim, and then we have Russia and North Korea denying it. Now you may be wondering, what is the West saying about this? Because of course, they always have something to say. And what's interesting here is that if you had asked them a couple of weeks ago, say if you had asked in particular the new NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte a couple of weeks ago, he would have denied any knowledge of these claims, right? He was kind of jumping around the answer. And yes, that's even as this is a man who has made support for Ukraine his entire personality. He did, in fact, dance around that question and simply claim he could not confirm that North Korean soldiers were, in fact, fighting alongside Russian forces. But that didn't last long, as on Monday, Pentagon spokesperson Sabrina Singh came out and said it was confirmed, that the U.S. had it confirmed that North Korea had sent around 10,000 troops to Russia for training and for possible deployment to Ukraine. She also claimed that a portion of those soldiers have already moved closer to Ukraine and that the US is concerned that the troops would be used in combat or to support combat operations against Ukrainian forces in Russia's Kursk region. That claim was also echoed by NATO chief Mark Rutte on Monday when he said that North Korean troops have been deployed to Russia and are operating in the Kursk region, calling it a significant escalation. Interesting how quickly Mr. Rutte changed his tune on that one. And it's important to note in the span of just over 2 weeks, we went from North Korea could be sending troops to Russia to they are sending troops to Russia to they have 10,000 troops in Russia to now those troops are being deployed to Russia's Kursk region to target Kiev's incursion there. Which, can we just take a moment to talk about the sheer level of hypocrisy here? I mean, there are God knows how many foreign fighters and mercenaries in Ukraine that NATO has sent, that NATO it's so involved in this country, and yet they want to turn and they want to criticize Russia for these claims that they are making about North Korean troops in Russia. They want to act as though, how dare there be troops from another country they claim in Russia's Kursk region targeting the Ukrainian troops who are there when they are the ones that took part in this incursion into Russia in the first place. I mean, the hypocrisy is truly never ending here. And now you've got the hopping on board and claiming that this most definitely is a problem and that it could lead to future problems, with White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby even declaring that if North Korean soldiers enter the Ukraine conflict on Russia's side, they will become legitimate military targets. Will they? Interesting, because it was literally just the West that was complaining whenever Russia said that other fighters from other nations, if they were in Ukraine, that they would become legitimate military targets. But I personally don't think the West is just hopping on board with this story because they actually have evidence of North Korean troops in Russia or in Russia's Kursk region or further into the Donbass region. No, I think that they're doing it because they want these headlines, right? They know that obviously Russia and North Korea are increasing ties on their end with this latest treaty. And they also know at the same time, or at least I would hope that they do know, that Russia is in a position where they would never send another country's troops to their front lines. How embarrassing would that be? And that's exactly what the West is trying to say, right? They're trying to say, oh, hey, Russia, they're increasing ties with North Korea. They're sending North Korean troops to their front lines to fight for them. They must be so incredibly desperate. But here's the thing. It's not Russia that is rolling out conscription efforts. It's not Russia that is using their press gangs to literally drag men off the streets and force them to fight and die in a war as conscripts, which is what Kiev is doing and what the West is supporting on its end. No, Russia is actively recruiting, and they're actually recruiting incredibly well, with reports that the number of newly enlisted troops in the Russian armed forces has increased sixfold over the past year, with more than 166,000 signing up in the first half of 2024. And yes, we get it. The West is just trying to make it sound as if Russia is so desperate while trying to also cover up the fact that Kiev right now is incredibly desperate. There's no denying that. Literally, just look at Zelensky and at the manpower shortages and weapon shortages that he and his regime are trying to deal with right now. So then comes the question. Are there North Korean troops in Russia whatsoever? Are they in Russia training there? Because that's an entirely different story. And I think that that's an interesting question to address as well. See, as we know, the Russian parliament recently ratified the bilateral treaty that Putin and Kim Jong-un agreed to back in June, which does include mutual military assistance. And in response to a question from reporters, Putin said, quote, "This is our sovereign decision, whether we use it or not, where, how, or whether we engage in exercises, training, or transfer some experience. It's our business." Now, I don't think it's any coincidence that the West and the mainstream media are trying to make it sound as if Russia and North Korea just came up with this partnership out of nowhere, right? As if there are no historical ties between the two countries. But I do think it's also important to look at what else we should be keeping an eye on when it comes to the timing of all of this. Because Just last week in Russia, there was the 16th annual BRICS summit. That's where, despite all of the efforts from the West over the last 2.5 years to demonize Putin and to isolate Russia altogether, you still had representatives from dozens of countries, including dozens of world leaders, coming to Russia, showing interest in joining the BRICS alliance. And I would argue that a large part of that has to do with the West and its campaign to try to isolate Russia. You have countries all over the world that are looking at the US and its Western allies going, okay, if you think that you can pull this off with targeting Russia with this massive sanctions campaign and this major proxy war, then what would you do to me? Right? For a number of those countries that are much smaller, that have less natural resources, they are going to be incredibly concerned about the ways in which the West could target them. And therefore, they're looking for any option out there to reduce their reliance on the US dollar, and rightfully so. But it's not just Zelensky's victory plan or these claims of North Korean troops headed to the front lines to fight against Ukraine and really all of NATO. Oh no, the West is also quite busy with another major precedent-setting move. Because let us not forget that the Group of Seven recently finalized a $50 billion loan for Kiev, backed by the interest earned from the $300 billion in Russian assets that the West seized 2.5 years ago. And if all of those countries that were represented at the BRICS summit last week weren't paying attention before, they are certainly paying attention now, because they're realizing that, well, wait a second, the US and its allies can just decide to not only freeze assets from a sovereign country, right, to target another country's assets into the $300 billion mark, but they can also use those assets, or yes, I know, even just the interest from them, to fund the war efforts of the country that they are currently fighting against. So literally, you have the Group of Seven deciding that they are going to steal Russian funds, and then they are going to use that money in order to fund the efforts to kill more Russians. And I know that we're just a week away from the upcoming presidential election here in the US, and there are a lot of questions about what will happen to US support for Ukraine, to US military aid for Kiev, if Trump wins, if Harris wins, and the major question of whether anything will fundamentally change. That's why that is the main topic of this week's episode of Sanctioned. I know that I mentioned it at the beginning of this video, so I won't go too much more into it, but just a reminder, if you are a paid subscriber already, you have that video to look forward to coming out on Wednesday, because I think it's a really important topic. There is a lot at stake here with this election and a lot of opportunities, right? The possibility that we could see a reduction of US military aid for the war in Ukraine, the possibility that we could see a president at least push for an end to it. Now, that's what Trump is claiming that he's going to do. Again, what he would actually decide to do if he is elected for a second term still remains to be seen. I'm not getting my hopes up fully on that one when it comes to an end to this war altogether. And of course, again, there's a lot more there than just the US deciding we're pulling our military aid and that being the quote unquote end of the war. There's a lot more that goes into that. It's a much more complicated situation, and just that wouldn't necessarily quote unquote end the war, so to speak. So I will be diving into all of that on this week's episode of Sanctioned. You don't want to miss it. And all of this really plays into the fact that when you have Kiev in a position of trying to make it look like Russia is just so desperate, right, that they would be calling out to North Korea, begging for their troops to come to their front lines, the reason that they're doing that is because Kiev, they are the ones who are desperate, right? It's the West right now who is incredibly desperate, trying to figure out what to do, because they know that there is no magical victory plan, right? There is no magical way that they are just going to quote unquote win this war. And they also know that Kiev is not winning right now, and that no amount of Western handouts is going to change that. Yes, even if it's funded by stolen Russian assets. And at the end of the day, that's something everyone should be talking about. If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. If you want to support my work, you can also check out my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. That's where you can sign up as a monthly paid subscriber and join the community there. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.